Okay, so welcome everyone to the talks as we continue on the Four Noble Truths, and we're starting the talk on the fourth noble truth. So I'm excited about offering this talk because I really practiced, I would say, in a non-helpful way with the fourth noble truth for many years. So I think I have some insights on a way that you can approach your practice with the fourth noble truth, and perhaps save you the years that I went through with practicing it. I would say with too much striving. I was making it kind of a list of things that I had to do. Does the sound still okay? Okay. So what I want to do, I want to kind of cover four main points. One is this word sama or right. You hear of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, and so forth. So I want to talk a bit about that word right. I want to talk about what I've found in my practice with the Eightfold path, which is the fourth noble truth, that it's not a beginner's path, and it's not a list of things that we have to strive to do or attain in some way. That it's so there's a real truth to the practice of the Eightfold path. And I'd also like to talk a bit about that one who follows the Eightfold path is actually a stream enterer, and what that means. And you heard me point to that notion of stream entry, or going with the current, the flow of life. So I'll talk a bit about what that means. And if I have time, I'll talk about how the Buddha framed all this as in terms of a middle way. And it's quite an interesting story. It's probably a story that might be kind of fun to do as a whole session. Is like what the Buddha did when he left the palace until the point of giving the talk on the fourth noble truth. That whole period is a really interesting story. It should be a feature film, I would think, because it is so, and it really points to how he figured out this middle way, because it wasn't the way of the times, that's for sure. It was something he came to on his own. So this word sama, or right, that we have in the Eightfold Path, every element in the Eightfold Path begins with sama, which is most often translated as right. Or sometimes I hear people call it wise, because people have a problem with right. So maybe wise sounds better, perhaps. So it's the fourth noble truth is the way to knowing, vidya. And it's a knowing that's not kind of knowledge as we think of it in terms of collecting information or doing analysis, and that's in the normal sense perhaps of the word. It's this kind of direct knowing, directly knowing based on our observable experience of living. And meditation is part of living. Simply, we create a bit of a laboratory to directly observe life unfolding in our meditation. So someone that has this knowing has developed, so you could say, the third noble truth, which is that this notion of a separate self that's in control of life is a misperception. That we don't gain happiness by clinging to what we perceive as pleasant, and pushing away what we perceive as unpleasant. In fact, it's by allowing everything to be, by not clinging to anything, that we can find non-suffering, find freedom. So someone that has that knowing, has this vijja, when that occurs, right view springs forth. It emerges and appears. And when right view springs forth, right intention springs forth. When right intention springs forth, right speech springs forth. And when right speech springs forth, right action springs forth. When right action springs forth, right livelihood springs forth. And when right livelihood springs forth, right effort springs forth. When right effort springs forth, right mindfulness springs forth. And when right mindfulness springs forth, right concentration springs forth. So those are the elements of the Eightfold Path. And it's not an action that a person does, but rather it's the result of letting go and deeper and deeper. And the way I was practicing with it is I thought it was something I had to make sure I did. Like, and when I didn't do it, little judgment voice would arise, and I'd go, yes, I didn't do that. Bad Dharma practitioner. The judgment would, and then I'll just have to try harder, particularly around right action and right speech, and the others as well. Mindfulness practice and so on, concentration practice, effort. So it's not, so we don't look at it so much as something that we do, but it's something that we allow to emerge once we're in the Dharma stream. So we're just allowing it to emerge. It emerges as part of the Eightfold Path. We become it. It's not something we do, it's something that we are. Once you've touched this element of the Third Noble Truth, where you see that you see through the misperceptions, you see the cause and the cessation of dukkha. You've touched that, your true nature, the essence of your being. Then the Eightfold Path springs forth. It springs up. It emerges moment by moment in life. So this word sama, which is sumyak in Sanskrit, sama in Pali, often translated as right or proper. I think another way you could look at it is complete. I've heard that word used at times. It's also a word, the Sanskrit word is also a tool. It's kind of a ladle that's used in sacred rituals in pre-Buddhist traditions. So it was a word for a kind of a sacred instrument. And so it kind of points to the sacredness of the word. These words get used in, almost 2,600 years ago in a particular context, in a particular culture, in a country, and then we translate them. And I think sometimes we might lose some of the essence or the richness of the word. And I think in this case, that sama might mean more than right or wise. I mean, those words capture a part of it and are useful in that way. But for me, I think it comes together more as a word that's pointing to a sacred wholeness or completeness. There's a sacred element to it, and there's an element of wholeness or completeness, harmoniousness, being in harmony as well. So we could call it complete view, whole view, sacred view. Um, yeah. So it's more to do with how a person becomes as they touch wholeness, or this sacredness that's innate within us. So I just point that out just to so that you kind of when I use the words right view, that's what I'm pointing to when I say, that word sama. It's pointing to that richer definition of the word. So and also to point to the notion of it's not something we do, but something that springs forth, and something we are, as the fourth noble truth. I always wondered why that, maybe you do too, wonder why this kind of eightfold path is the fourth noble truth. It's kind of after realization. It's after kind of, it's almost like it's after awakening or enlightenment happens. Well, now you've got this fourth noble truth that sounds like, really kind of basic stuff, right? Like, and if you're an enlightened being, why would you need to be thinking about these things? You'd be an enlightened being. And I think for me, how it unfolded for me, and the fact that it is fourth, it feels right, kind of logically as well, is that it's we often think of the mountain metaphor. We climb the mountain and the idea of that, you're in the present moment, step by step, attaining the summit, which is often seen as equivalent to awakening, this notion of liberation or freedom, seeing the illusion of a separate self. I see that as the third noble truth, kind of reaching the summit, touching that aspect of our true nature. I see going down the other side of the mountain as the Eightfold Path. So and think of the stream. So the Buddha said, when you enter the Eightfold Path, you are a stream enterer. The stream flows down the mountain, and at this point, you're just allowing the current of that mountain stream to carry you. So the Dharma, in a sense, is just carrying you, and these aspects are springing forth in your practice. There's this truly effortless nature to the practice at this point. So that's how I came to view the eightfold path, is coming down the other side of the mountain. And it being the fourth noble truth then kind of makes sense, right? So it's not a beginner's kind of list of things to do, not in any way, shape, or form. It's the fourth of the noble truths after the third. Yeah, you could say that, there's two meanings of the Eightfold Path. One is that it's the practice that we do that leads to liberation. And this is how I was conceiving of it for many years, that it was a list of things that I needed to do. And if I kept doing them, it would lead to freedom and understanding. Or it could be viewed as the Eightfold Path, not what leads to freedom from suffering, but rather an expression of our freedom, an expression of our liberation. This is how it expresses once the third noble truth and cessation of freedom is touched. Liberation expresses itself through right view, right intention, right action, right thought, right speech, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. You can see how those can all be expressions. And if you think of it in terms of the sacred speech or whole harmonious sacred action, so if you get the completeness of that word sama, it really lights up as an expression of our freedom, of our deep touching of our true nature, as opposed to a bunch of things that we do to help hopefully lead us to liberation. I hope you're getting what I'm saying here, because it can really well. I wish Ted would. If you're similar to me, it might save you 10 years of of running around in circles and kind of beating yourself up for not having perfect speech and perfect action and perfect meditations, because it's far from that. And I'll talk a bit about why it's far from that. So we have some degree of this taste of freedom, this taste of the cessation. It doesn't have to be complete, right? So it's not like the third noble truth means we're totally realized, and now we practice the Eightfold Path. It's with some taste, some degree of this, of sensing into this, and I think we've all had that. We've all had that, whether we know it or not. The question is, have we sensed into it to the extent that we know it? That's what last week's talk was really about, sensing into that third noble truth, such that we know it. And then we flow into the eightfold path. If you, I would recommend, if you didn't make it to last week's talk, just to kind of dip into at least the first 20 minutes or half an hour of it and get a sense of that, because that it really does lead quite naturally then into the eightfold path. So there's some degree of freedom that we then enter into this eightfold path. So it's kind of more of a description of how we live once we've touched our deeper reality, the deeper reality of our being, touch the wholeness. So it's more a description of how life then unfolds, how then the practice begins to flow. So it's not a beginner's practice. And I must say I was very confused by this notion when I first practiced with the Four Noble Truths. And it kind of came to me at one point. I kept thinking, the Buddha was so logical, or Ananda, or whoever wrote this stuff down, that he said it was so logical in these lists, and they all kind of made coherent sense. And why was this fourth? Like that didn't make sense. So I really, and when it wasn't working, so I started really kind of scratching my head and going, I had this deep sense that I was missing something. And so I started to investigate a little more and found out that, this is a unique way to look at the Four Noble Truth. In Joseph Goldstein's book called Mindfulness, it's a big, thick book. First word in the title is mindfulness. He's got a chapter that touches this a little bit, which is helpful to if you want more on that notion. It's an excellent sort of book that gives you a good overview of all the sort of aspects of insight meditation. So when we realize our true nature, when we touch the essence of our being, we enter the Eightfold Path. As I said, it's using that mountain metaphor. Where we reach the top of the mountain, that's seen as the path, the journey, the spiritual journey to this, to knowing, the deep knowing. When the deep knowing is touched, then we flow down the other side of the mountain with the mountain streams. We go with the flow. At this point, there's no struggle getting up the mountain. You simply allow the flowing streams, the current, to carry you, to carry the practice. So I don't know how many folks have heard of the notion of being a stream enterer. Have folks heard of that idea? Yeah, some have, some haven't. So I'll give a little bit of context. So all the Buddhist traditions have their kind of maps of the process to awakening, right? In Zen, there's the 10 ox herding pictures, and each of the ox herding pictures represents a kind of a stage or a phase in one's spiritual development towards enlightenment. So that's an example. In Theravadan or insight meditation, there's this kind of 4 phases that are spoken about in the early suttas. And stream entry is the first stage. The second stage is once returner, and the third is no returner, and the fourth is arahant, and the arahant is a totally realized being. So I'm not going to go through all those, but just to give you some context where this word or this phrase stream enter comes from. And it really strikes me as an interesting choice of words. And again, if you look at the word, sota is the Pali word, it actually points also to the idea of current, of the flowing current in a stream. And I think that's, so it's not like you're standing in a pool of water in a stream and just, it's not, this is probably why I use stream and not a lake, or it's a stream. It's moving. There's current, and you're in it, and you're flowing. So that's the idea of being a stream enter. And once you enter the current, you've entered the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is the current in the stream. And you allow the momentum of the current to pull you further and further along into a fuller and fuller realization of the end of dukkha, the end of suffering, of freedom. And then, this is pretty clear in the early suttas, where the Buddha said to Sariputta. Sariputta was kind of his first, the one who kind of was the most informed, I guess, kind of his first disciple, I guess you could say. Said to him, one who possesses the Noble Eightfold Path is called a stream enterer. So he's really pointing to that very directly, that this is what a stream enterer is. It's one who has entered the Eightfold Path, entered the stream of the Eightfold Path. And of course, other places in the suttas he talks about, there's another definition of stream enter that's given, and that's one who is who's attained the first, who's overcome, so uprooted the first 3 of the 10 fetters. I don't know if you've come across that word, fetters, but there's 10 fetters. When all 10 are uprooted, of course, you're fully liberated. And uprooting the first 3 is another indication of stream entry. So he talks about that in other places, but it's mostly talked about as the Eightfold Path, allowing the Eightfold Path to live through you. By the way, the first three fetters, one is doubt. So doubting that the teachings are true. And of course, doubt comes up often in our practice. You know, you do some teachings, you think, wow, is this stuff for real? I mean, it's so old, and there's all these other traditions, and everybody thinks they've all got a different one, and they all think they're right. And I went through years of this as well. So ultimately, you kind of realize they're all saying the same thing, and then you kind of go, okay, well, then I'll just stick with this one. But I had to actually go and explore a lot of different traditions to quell the doubts. I spent 20 years doing yoga practice, doing Vedic study, lived in an ashram in India to explore that. I'm a level 2 yoga teacher. Maybe you didn't know that. That's how far into it I got. Is the registered yoga teacher, 500-hour. So I was big into this. This is how doubt kept coming up. You know, I was into Christianity in a big way. I was a missionary, if you can believe that, in my early 20s with the United Church. So you can see how I had to explore so many avenues before I could quell different doubts. And I've come across this one insight meditation, and it's really stuck, and it's made sense, and it's, you know, I've seen all the similarities, the beautiful similarities with other sacred traditions. But really, I've said this before, I spent how many years exploring the bottom of the mountain. I'd go up a path, I'd go up a little bit, I'd come back down to the base, I'd find another path, I'd go up a little bit, I'd come back down to the base, go around the mountain a little bit, find another path, go up a little bit, come down, back down to the base. So now the idea is now so I knew the base of the mountain really well. Like I could tell you the base, like from so many different traditions. I at some point decided, okay, and it was actually a teacher that said, well, you might want to just stay on one path and get halfway up the mountain. And at that point, you might look around and see all the other traditions and kind of go, oh, we're all saying the same thing, but you'll never see that if you don't get halfway up the mountain, right? You'll just keep exploring the base, you know, which can be fun. It can be interesting. The base of Mount Kilimanjaro was almost more interesting than the than the rest of the mountain, but not in a spiritual sense, it's not as exciting. So doubt is the one that gets uprooted. The other is, and this comes from the Buddha's era, that rites and rituals are uprooted. They're no longer seen as the path to freedom. And this is more relevant really to his era. But you know, I spent many years doing different Vedic and tantric yogic rituals, and they're beautiful. I mean, and they do speak in a certain way. But that was one of the fetters that the Buddha said must be uprooted before you become a stream enter. And the third is self-view, that we no longer see. We've seen through the misperception or the illusion of a separate independent self that's running the show. So that's a very important one. And that's really when we touch into our true nature and the third noble truth, we really see then the misperception of a separate self is where we touch into the wholeness. So that's the other aspect of being a stream enterer. So once you're a stream enterer, there's no going back. You've jumped into the river and it's going down the hill, going down the mountain, and you're in it for the trip. You might hit a few trees or It's, try to swim to shore, but ultimately you're just going to get back in the current because there's really nothing to do on the shore. So you'll just keep going with the flow. So you're in it. You're in the flow and you'll just live the Eightfold Path more and more as that'll emerge more and more in your life as you flow with the stream. You're flowing, you're allowing freedom to move through you. Remember, the ego never becomes awakened. Actually, one of the most dangerous things, perhaps, on the planet is an ego that thinks it's awakened. Right? Now, the ego doesn't become awakened. You simply see that life just lives as you, and you can, and it's just a flow as life lives. Consciousness lives as you. And once you let go, in the third noble truth, that really becomes kind of your reference point as well. If we talk about touching into our innate consciousness, innate awareness, the space around the breath becomes your reference point, and you kind of live at that reference point. So all these elements of the Eightfold Path, they just kind of flow naturally as you rest in that reference point or that knowing. You can touch it, you'll touch it throughout the day, that reference point, that knowing. You touch it throughout the day. It just bubbles up as a beautiful kind of joy. So in this group, I've spoken about impatience. This personality that's arisen here has done a lot of work with impatience. So I won't talk about that much, just to set that as the background for the story. Today, I took my father to the lab to get a lab test, and you all know what labs are like, right? And he's 93, and I know some of you have met him, and he's aged a fair bit just in the last year with what's going on. He's happy, but he is aging. And we went up to the lab to get to get an X-ray, and the woman basically said, "Oh, well, we're not." We went at like 1:00. We're not taking any more X-rays today. We're full in terms of the X-rays. And I'm not sure my dad even really heard what she said. He just hands her his card, and with the masks on and stuff. It's just a guessing game in terms of what people might be saying. When you're elderly, it's I think 80% of what they hear comes from reading lips, and the other 20% from the sounds that enter the ear cavity. So I just kind of looked very disappointed, and she said, "Well, let me see what I can do." And so she, goes behind and comes back. She goes, "Okay, I can fit your father in." And so this, that's beautiful, and not only that, he can go in right now. So this huge joy just kind of overflowed that this happened, and that I've spent many moments in a waiting room, a medical appointment waiting room, with impatience present. And at that moment, it just kind of went, I'm going to feel joy when I'm sitting in a waiting room waiting, knowing that there's maybe somebody like my father that went ahead and got their appointment, because him coming back was going to be very difficult. It's quite a rigmarole just to get there, and he was exhausted and he hadn't even had the X-ray done. So it was just an intense joy, and that's just kind of the flow of the of the um, of the Eightfold Path, just arising in that moment and sensing into it, and seeing how it kind of extinguished another little spark of uprooted another little spark of what might be of impatience. So we're allowing these elements of the Eightfold Paths to simply naturally move in us. And to see when they don't, to see maybe next appointment I go to, who knows, right? That's part of the flow. You really don't know what's going to happen next. Could maybe impatience will arise, and then I'll just have to go, wow, that's interesting, and not resist that, but just be with that as part of the flow of life. So when we have this deep connection with our deeper nature, these elements of the Eightfold Path can flow. We can have the intentions to be kind and compassionate. We can be careful with speech and action. We can be gentle in our efforts with mindfulness and samadhi or concentration, and be open and allowing in those practices. So we're really basing our lives then and our practice on that deeper truth of freedom that we've touched in the third noble truth. And this allows our practice to go deeper and deeper and deeper as we flow. I was using that metaphor of flow and current in the guided meditation. I'm not sure how it works in a guided meditation, but I was really pointing to the notion of just flowing with life as it naturally unfolds. Flowing with life as it naturally unfolds, and noticing our view, our intentions, our speech, our actions, our livelihood, our effort, mindfulness and concentration, our meditation. The Eightfold Path is really divided, you could say, into three categories. There's the wisdom elements, which is right view and right intention, which are the first two. Then there's the kind of the ethical ones, which are the next three. The sila, or ethical morality, is our speech, our actions, and our livelihood. And then the last three have to do with our meditation practice, or the effort, how we bring effort to our practice, meditation and life. I mean, mindfulness is also unfolds in life, but it's that those practice elements. So you kind of see those three categories, and whether you see them as steps or a circle, or so you'll read, people will say, well, Joseph Goldstein says there's steps. He's very clear in the book that I just mentioned called Mindfulness, that one leads to the next. Others will say that it's more of a holistic, interconnected whole. So I kind of look at it as both. I kind of there is kind of a logic to the steps of them, to how they flow. And starting with right view, I'll talk next week about why that can be very important in terms of our practice. And I think right view is first, intentionally. In fact, I don't think the Buddha really did a whole lot that wasn't intentional or conscious in terms of the teachings that I've been exposed to, at least. So look, that's the Eightfold Path. So we get into the current, You're all ready to get a little wet. Step into the current. I hope you've been with me on this journey through the first 3 noble truths. And we can all step into the current and flow. Allow life to unfold or flow without clinging or with non-interference. Of course, but we know we don't resist anything. So even when clinging arises, even when you cling, or there's a desire that's arising, we're not resisting that. We're just noticing it, saying, this is this moment. This is what's arisen in this moment. We're simply being conscious in all our moments. And when you've gone through what we've just gone through, where we've entered into the 3rd noble truth and touched wholeness and the truth of our existence, all this flow has a completely different color, a different seen in a different way, perceived differently. It's just arising based on habits, based on genetics, based on causes and conditions. You don't control any of that. I think that's why non-self view is one of the elements of one of the fetters that is part of getting in the stream. I'm gonna the whole story about from the Buddha when he left the palace to when he gave this talk is probably not going to fit into I think I got a little carried away. I started writing this. I've got 7 pages of that story, so maybe I'll just email it to you. But it is a very interesting story about how he came to the middle way, and this middle way is what's very unique. It was unique about the Buddha's teachings in contemporary in India in his time, because the 2 ways were either kind of more self engaging in pleasures of life, or severe austerities where you completely withdrew from the senses. You sense pleasures bad. They pull you into worldly existence. If you want to feel the sacred, you need to push away the worldly. And he kind of went, no, he did that for 6 years. And he felt he didn't get anywhere. He didn't eat much, completely withdrew from sense pleasures, kind of really tortured himself for 6 years, and found he didn't get anywhere. So that's part of his discovery of the middle way. And the Eightfold Path is kind of this offering of the middle way. So a way to really engage in the world with kindness and compassion and wisdom. And I think that sentence right there is why the Dharma is taken off like a rocket in the West, in Europe, North America, Australia, actually all over the world. It's even in Latin America. Is this the notion of the middle way, that we can still, it's a worldly practice, bringing wisdom to our actions in the world, both internally and externally. So I'll open it up for questions. Any questions or comments on that talk, or when I say anything else that's come up in your practice, I actually mean that. You can ask questions about the talk, or you can ask questions about something that's happening in your practice, your own practice.
So Steve, does it mean, I see what you mean in terms of the fourth noble truth being one that you want to kind of wait till you go down the mountain. But um, and I too beat myself up constantly over like unwise speech and unwise thoughts. But I kind of think there's some usefulness to them as well. Like you can't just say, well, I'll forget them. Is that what you're saying, or you just say like don't try to strive for them, but know about them and maybe kind of keep them in your awareness and sometimes use them, because I'm just wondering what you mean. Like if you mean like you should just like not try and tackle them at all, or keep them in mind.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm talking about the Eightfold Path as best as I can in terms of how I have discovered it for myself in how the Buddha taught it. What I really what I deeply discovered to be what it intends in terms of as in terms of a practice. Of course, in insight meditation, we have the 5 precepts, which are much more directed at um, how we behave, and that's a way and non-harming is what a great precept that just to hold that in our lives to move through life in a way that's non-harming to all beings, all sentient, insects, other humans, animals, plants, rocks. Yeah, my neighbor across the road's a Vietnamese Buddhist, and I noticed he had all kinds of ants. He just built a beautiful new house. He had all these little ant hills all along his walkway. So I asked him about these ants, and I said, what are you going to do anything about the ants that are there? And then he says, no, they're fine. So are they getting into the house at all? He goes, yeah, sometimes they get in the house. I'm really surprised, a brand new house, that the ants are getting in the house. I said, well, are I'm just trying to find out if he's if he's practicing non-harming, right? He goes, oh no, I capture them and I take them out into the backyard and I let them go. He doesn't get the backpack garden sprayer and load it up with toxic chemicals and start blasting them. So this is he's living one of the precepts of non-harming. So I would, to answer your question, Carl, is I think really the precepts give us these more these and I call them mindfulness trainings, they're not commandments, they're really things to have in our mind as we're navigating the world in terms of how we behave and act. So the precepts cover that, right? The precepts really work for that, and we chant the precepts before retreats and in different activities that we might do together. So the question is, well, then what's the Eightfold Path? So the Eightfold Path's a little different. It's not precepts. It's what emerges as we've touched our true nature in the third noble truth. So that's how I see them as different. So yeah, I would go back to the precepts if what you find helpful is these kind of behavioral how we behave in the world, act in the world, kind of trainings, guidelines. Then the precepts, I think, cover that off. Which was another question that arose. Like, we have precepts. What's the Eightfold Path? Just sounds like a little more specific, because proper speech is a precept, proper action. So some of them are already on the list of the precepts, and not ingesting intoxicants and uh, sexual misconduct is the other one. So they're there as guidelines to live, and how how do we live when we practice as spiritual communities, and then how we live in the world as well. So yeah, that's how I would kind of frame it. So the Eightfold Path I see as something quite different than that. Hmm.
Okay. Um, I don't like the go with the flow thing. Because I see this practice um, as completely contrary to that. I see looking at things as they are as being quite contrary to just sitting and riding that raft on the lazy river. Um, so that metaphor you threw out in the meditation was like, nah, not my jam. Um, and it's interesting you brought up the different approaches on the Eightfold Path, because I think very much, I mean, in a lot of ways, when I see the word path, I automatically attribute some linearity to it. Which with this one, I think can put roadblocks to a lot of folks, myself included. And I like the holistic approach, and it's sort of like, here's some guideposts on this all-terrain trail you're kind of taking. Um, it that in my for this being, it at least allows me um, to not seek check marks along the way. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to share that. Thanks.
Yeah. So the Buddha, you like to use current as metaphors in so many different ways. So he uses the metaphor of current or stream. The word actually translates better as current. When he said it, the Dharma is swim. You when you engage in the Dharma, you're swimming against the stream, because the life is telling you to go one way, accumulate, get praise. You see how life moves, right? How a bunch of egos together are going in one direction. So he used the metaphor of swimming against the current. Actually, Noel Levine has a great book called Against the Stream, which picks up on that notion of going against the stream. What he's talking about there is going against that stream of the movement of the egoic minds moving. That when in the Eightfold Path, when he talks about stream entry, when you become a stream enter, the idea isn't to enter the stream and then fight current. What he's talking about there is now he's using the metaphor as flowing with the Dharma. So he's using the word in a different way, and it's stream enter. I mean, or current enter. That's the first stage of enlightenment. So, but you're entering the current of the Dharma. Now the Dharma is just living through. I mean, you're in it. Once you're a stream enter, you can dabble in this stuff, right? Listen to a talk here, meditate once in a while. But once you've touched your true nature and you've got the taste of that freedom of letting go that arises from letting go, the Eightfold Path lives through you, and you enter the stream of the Dharma. So that's the kind of the difference. So when I say you're entering the stream, you're not entering like the stream of like regular like life, like the egoic lives. as it's leaving out. So that's a great question, because the Buddha uses these metaphors in different ways. A stream enter, does that mean I'm just going to go with the flow of, of life, but of all these egos that are, no, it's a kind of a different way of, but you are going with the flow in the sense of realizing that you don't control the stream. So you're not, grasping and pushing away aspects of life as your living it. Doesn't, and we've talked about this, mean you're a doormat or you don't take action in the world. It just means you're present with whatever's arising moment by moment. So that's kind of being in the flow of, or current of the Eightfold Path, or of the Dharma. I can't remember the second part. Oh, whether it's steps or path. He does. So the word, so it's called the Eightfold Path, and the word path is patipada in Pali. And again, it doesn't really translate as path. It's again one of these, we translate all these words, but it's because you're right, a path kind of indicates a way or a linear, kind of movement. It actually probably it would be more accurate just to call it the eightfold practice, because it's not a path leading to something. It's simply a collection of, it's a group of practices. It's not a road or path, but rather methods. Yeah. So those are very helpful clarifications. Thank you.
Thanks. I just realized that the mountain metaphor also works with that too, right? Like you're going against the stream on your way up, and you've got it, and then you're riding it, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stephen, I'm still trying to get my thoughts together, and I'm not sure that this will come out very coherent, but the talk tonight really resonated with me. And I felt like there were lots of glimpses of insights that I sort of had this felt sense inside that they're very profound and true. But I'm not sure that I'm going to be very good at integrating them, or I'm not really sure how to go about integrating them. What you talked about, the path being about allowing and not doing, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, there's a certain relief from that in that I don't have to be striving. Like I'm definitely very goal-oriented, always striving, and lots of self-judgment if things don't work out. So this idea of just allowing, instead of having to sort of be striving, almost having a check marks for did you do this right or not, it takes away some of the self-judgment, and that's helpful. The ideas that you talked about, flowing with the stream, allowing freedom to move through you, flowing with life as it naturally unfolds, those really resonated very strongly with me, and not just for meditation practice. I mean, it's kind of like the ideal of how I'd like to be living my life. And then I look at like what's impeding that, and ultimately, I guess it's fear. I'm maybe not feeling safe. There's a fear of not being in control, the sense that if I just really let go to the extent that this is calling for, something's going to go terribly wrong. So I just don't have the confidence. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about those kind of impediments to sort of moving into that sort of allowance in practice and maybe life in general.
Yeah, well, what a question. I mean, that could be a whole year-long series of talks, right? Because it's one thing to point out the practices and the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, but we have fear and anxiety that arises throughout we see this when we meditate, right? You'd think if you, you could just sit and be still and follow your breath, right? Or follow the space between your breaths. And heck, what could be simpler than that, right? It sounds so friggin' simple, like just, but it's so challenging. And so the question is why? The egoic mind's constantly resisting. And we've talked about the egoic mind needs movement and struggle to sustain itself. So as soon as you swim against the stream of the egoic mind, which wants movement and struggle, and go for stillness and allowing, you get this resistance coming up. So, plop a thought in there about something that'll stir things up. Like literally, I kind of think like Mara, like the Buddha sat there under the tree and Mara kept coming. It's like, Mara, I see you. Like, it's just stirring the pot. Like, literally, I'll be sitting in stillness, and the stillness will be getting very, very deep, and then all of a sudden, the mind will pop up. It's some really anxious, ridden thought. Like, where did that come from? Like, what's it doing there? So I see this, I really do, and I've given a lot of talks over the years about how to relate mindfully with fear, how to relate mindfully with anxiety, how to relate mindfully with impatience, with every emotion you can think of, right? with busy mind, with all that, right? But I think at the root of all of that, ultimately, is the egoic mind's relentless struggle to remain. And this might be hard to hear. It's because it sounds like there's you're two things, right? And you're not. You're one, but you're a whole. But it kind of sounds like, consciousness wants to reveal itself, and the egoic mind just keeps bringing up fear and anxiety to really distract you or pull you away from that current. So you're not two, but there's definitely a process going on whereby the egoic mind is resisting awakening, is resisting stillness, is resisting silence. And those are all portals to your true nature, right? The stillness, the silence, the quiet. So that, we just keep going back to it. So all you can really do, and I keep going, because I'm going through a lot of this in my life now, is this very strong, and I think the deeper you get into this, the stronger the resistance gets. It gets worse, not better. So these talks on, your mindful way through fear, the more mindful you get, the worse the fear gets. I mean, the ego just keeps up in the ante pretty much. And you see this with the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree, and sort of the progression of what was thrown into his mind, which is symbolized by Mara, the demon or whatever. It's in all religions, right? The temptation of the devil or of Mara in this case. And all he could do is say, I see you, Mara. Didn't resist it, didn't do anything with it, just kept saying, I see you, Mara. I see you. And that's become kind of my mantra. Sometimes I'll even say, I see you. I'll put a name, a little label to what I'm actually seeing. But that's would be what I would offer in terms of a practice. Of course, I think all those talks that the mindful way through all these different things are helpful because they're pointing people to going back to the present moment, right? Letting go of whatever that might be, coming back to the present moment, being with the present moment. So that's bringing you back to where the portal to awakening resides, in the present moment, in the stillness. But I kind of, to answer your question, Alan, I've dug through all that and gone to basically the basis of all of that is the egoic mind, or Mara, whatever we might call it, something that's within the whole that's resisting consciousness, seeing awareness or consciousness seeing itself, if we could put it that way. I hope you find that. I hope that answers. That's not often the answer people want to hear. I'd rather, it's because a nice set of steps on how to deal with fear is kind of, the ego can get there, they can grab onto that and go, oh yeah, I can do that. When fear arises, ego will actually like, 3 steps to dealing with fear, because it gives them it's movement. So all the talks I've been offering for the last while have tried to go beyond speaking to your egoic minds and to try to speak at a deeper level to your essence. So that's why my answers may seem strange, perhaps not. So we'll end it there, and our next talk will be the mindful way through something, the mindful way through the Eightfold Path. Yeah, well, I'd like to spend some time on the Eightfold Path, if that's okay. And I think we can, like, right view was a beautiful one to do a whole session on. Right intention as well, and maybe lump some. We'll see how it flows, but and see how they can live. Each one can live through us, and what they mean. I mean, I'll give you kind of the traditional. There's traditional descriptions, of course, of them all that are out there, that are useful to have as a basic understanding. Yeah. So
Thanks, Stephen.
thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope to see you next week. I'm going to contact Zoom and see if I can fix this Zoom problem that we're having. But anyway, thanks everyone for coming, and namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Namaste.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Nice seeing everyone.
Oh, sure.
Good night, everyone.
Bye, Sangha. See you later.
Thank you.